What's this? Oh, well, this is a souffle. But what's this video? Oh, I see. Well, so this is a video about one lone Greek Nazi in Australia. One little guy, and I do mean little, who's been left by the only people who'd ever have him, which is other neo-Nazis. And that might not seem to you to be notable enough stuff for me to go and make a whole video about. Maybe you're right. Actually, also, I'm going against my usual policy of not kind of documenting the lesser, more trivial happenings of local fucking fascist dregs in doing this. The reason I've made an exception is because, well, I've known of the guy for a while. Actually, a long time. And because this might be the last time I ever talk about him. It feels a little bit like I'm writing a eulogy here. It's not that he's dead, don't get me wrong. But he's very alone now. And he's going to be very alone forthwith. And it really couldn't happen to a nicer guy. So, let me do my eulogy. So here he is. Stefan E is his name, and he's a dusky, rich, brown-hued Greek Australian. He's possessed of a deep, rich tone, a hue, you know? A deep Mediterranean skin tone, evocative of beautiful Cerignola olives, fresh ones. He's not white, is what I'm saying. You know what I mean? And here he is wearing a beautiful, sweet Greek costume. Some sort of traditional Greek costume with beautiful white stockings. The most white thing about him is the stockings. Just a beautiful, stocking-clad, brown Greek woman. Now, I have no doubt that for many lefties listening to this, I will have just said some stuff that would have struck them as deeply problematic, to say the least. You might say, you're apportioning out whiteness, gatekeeping it in the same way that a fascist does. This shows me that you have the same white supremacist standards as a fascist. Who are you to be proclaiming yourself as an anti-fascist? And you might say, who are you to be leveraging derogatory comments about his cultural dress that is at once demeaning in a more than slightly misogynist fashion, gender essentialist, and parochial and ignorant regarding Greek cultural dress at this person? And to you, I would say, in response to all your very fair concerns, okay, fair enough, but just shut up for a minute because I want to talk to you about standards and double standards. In the early 2010s, I clearly remember watching Stuart Lee's comedy special. If you prefer a milder comedian, please ask for one, is what it's called. And it blew my mind. My favourite bits deal with his rationale for a series of really fucking brutal gags that he does about Top Gear presenter Richard Hammond. He gets stuck into all the guests, but particularly Hammond. He blinds his children at one point. He severs Hammond's head in a car accident and sets the head on fire. A lot of brutal stuff. He explained why. He essentially distilled the approach for the benefit of critics and idiots alike, here.
I was using an exaggerated form of the rhetoric and the implied values of Top Gear to satirise the rhetoric and the implied values of Top Gear.
Not only did I internalise that for the purposes of the anti-fascist comedy I went on to do in the late 2010s, but also it happens to be the perfect way to upend purity spiralling niched political types like National Socialists, because they always fall short of their own standards when you consistently apply them to them. What are the rhetoric and implied value sets of fascists and National Socialists? Well, obviously it's very racist, they're misogynists, they're hyper-masculinists. They tell you that themselves, you know. They're obsessed with racial purity, right? Many modern Nazi groups embrace this ridiculous thing called pan-European nationalism. They really need friends, so they don't want to turn away the eager European recruits who don't exactly look like Hyperborean gods. By that I mean people that Hitler would have exterminated. But they try to hold firm on skin colour, at least in their rhetoric, you know. They obviously prefer white skin. Captain Obvious here. That's what they say anyway. And they're also fixated on stuff like physical toughness, strength, you know, fight training and stature and stuff. You know, Australian neo-Nazis do really manly stuff like have play fights with 16-year-old recruits in suburban parks. They're obsessed with physical appearance. And they are obsessed with men and women, you know, like this is feminine, that's... Gossiping is a feminine trait. Fighting is a masculine trait. Scheming, backstabbing, oh, that's feminine. But being a leader is masculine. That sort of thing. I include all this talk about standards so that I can tell you from the outset that the Nazi I'm eulogising fails on all of these accounts. He's an abject failure by the standards of Nazis. And yet he still somehow managed to become central to the machinery of Australian neo-Nazi stuff. It's a miracle. He's a little magic miracle elf. If we are to eulogise little Stefan properly, as someone who was central to the machinery of Australian neo-Nazism, it makes sense to me to apply his standards to him. So what was I saying? Oh yeah, he's not white. And he was a nationalist stalker since back in the mid-2010s, like for ages. Particularly abusive to women online. The kid reminded me of like incels or MGTOWs, a way he'd carry on always or particularly at women. Stefan was obsessed with me since as early as 2016. Back then, I used to tell him, you're not white, you're Greek, because he had an obsession with the White Australia policy and yet with showing me Greek culture things. Then I saw him from across a cop line in 2018. He waved at me. He was wearing a little Confederate flag singlet and he waved at me and I stared at him for entire minutes fucking aghast because I was staring at one of the smallest men I'd ever seen in my life. Now, I don't want you to think that I actually care that much about size, because you probably would have heard me carrying on at Avi Yemeni about his size over time. The approach that I adopted with him was the same as with Stefan. You know, you're supposed to be the hyper-masculinist. You are failing by your own standards. But forget about Avi, because Avi happens to be a short bloke, but Stefan is one of the smallest men I've ever seen in my life who doesn't experience the condition of dwarfism. And I must say, seeing him in real life brought into relief for me that this was a bloke quite literally too small of frame to bring all of these lurid misogynist threats against all these women that he always issued to bear. And in fact, that made me wonder if that's why he issued so many of them. Anyway, his kind of racist, Islamophobic, civic nationalism of the mid-2010s, at least it made sense to me in a one nation, multiculturalism, gone bigoted sort of a way. But he vanished for a time, and then he re-emerged as a white supremacist neo-Nazi. You know, he'd gone further down that path. And when I saw that, you know, I practically spat out my olives.
And is that your new webcam?
Yeah, it's a new one. Yeah, we're good.
So people can get a more close-up look at you.
Yeah, the Aryan features, so to speak. Need to make sure I advertise that. But
he actually enjoyed a few years as a brown, Greek, white Nazi. He enjoyed a visible role as a member of the National Socialist Network. I think they kind of held him at arm's length for a while because he's so cringe before eventually letting him in because he lavished him with so much attention and effort.
You know, we're not monsters. We just love our country. And we're just doing and we're saying what our ancestors would have said. We believe what our ancestors believed in. We're fighting for white Australia.
Stefan made lots of stickers for the group and he posted copious amounts of nationalist and racist abuse online. So he had a lot of energy for white nationalism, and I think in the end the racists embraced him because they love a friend. But nothing Stefan ever did as a Nazi felt right. Like everything else he did, it always felt a bit NQR. He had a Telegram channel, this is fucking sad, called Barbecue Nationalism. He'd share patently ethnic food that he cooked in his little backyard grill, whilst insisting that it was white Australian tucker. And a lot of these Australian neo-Nazis kind of knew him and felt desperate for friends, so they kind of, you know, wouldn't say rude stuff. It would take the American Nazis. They were often the only ones to point out to him that to their perspective, their Nazi perspective, it wasn't white at all. What is barbecue nationalism anyway? It's nothing. It's something a really lonely person comes up with. That's it. Stefan bought a Jack Russell puppy and a dog pram. I don't know if you know, but dog prams initially became all the rage among like Taiwanese women and Korean women, and then the trend spread out to the rest of the West. You know, you can see it in cities nowadays, but originally it's a Taiwanese woman thing. He'd share this little dog pram pupper in Telegram spaces populated by the most militant accelerationist neo-Nazis in Australia, all of them on a watch list, and sort of, you know, hope for their approval. And sometimes they would, they would make like muted noises. Oh, yeah, great. He'd regularly put NSN stickers up on kids' playground equipment. Maybe he was hoping to recruit 4-year-old boys as tall as him. Then he'd proudly share photos of this work and admit where he was doing it. Why would you show people that you were focusing on stickering little children's playgrounds? Another time he went out for like vote no kind of anti-voice action at some point last year. And he did so in the company of a few schoolboys that he'd randomly recruited to help out. It's bad enough and mystifying enough to even do that, but then to tell everyone, to brag about it. He shared photos, unblurred, of these schoolboys to his channel. What's he fucking thinking? Stefan concentrated most of his activist energies on threatening women, like abusing Senator Lydia Thorpe, which he did repeatedly and at length, because, as we've established, he had most of his energy reserved for abusing women. He was charged with using a carriage service to harass, and just a few weeks ago was convicted. He would send constant graphic abuse and constant threats. But the thing about Stefan was he never physically backed any of that up himself. He always had the big men in the NSN to hide behind. Actually, at one point before Stefan's involvement with NSN, when he didn't have them to hide behind, he became obsessed briefly with a Macedonian politician, of course a woman, who had been flying a flag that some Greek people consider offensive, and he ended up getting bashed in a Ribs and Burgers car park by a bunch of Macedonian nationalists for that. So he did benefit from the proximity to and the protection of the NSN people. The height of his real-life activism, in fact, was heading into a Mill Park library to bravely put anti-Semitic and Nazi stickers in the toilets at the local library. As I understand it, people began to pick that it was him when they matched his arrival with the appearance of a bright purple Nissan Juke in the car park. Stefan's cute little Nissan Terramobile. But without a doubt, the biggest thing that Stefan ever got involved in came after a bartender at Melbourne CBD pub The Irish Times refused a neo-Nazi service. And then, after they refused to leave, he spat in his beer. It stirred a wave of threats and challenges to the bartender and to the bar owner from neo-Nazis around the world. And Stefan came into his element here. He sent a legal threat to the owner of the bar saying, we should be allowed to come drink in here. If you don't pay us an amount of money, we're going to take action against you. Legal threats, this, that and the other, unless you post an apology and send us $651. The owner complied, and the owner also made a public post to the effect that he was firing the staff and told Stefan the same thing. So this owner goes and posts an apology, not just to the Nazi in question, but also to Thomas Sewell, who wasn't even there at the time, directly complying with what Stefan had told him, and sent him this amount of money, which they all used to go back and drink in the bar again with. It was a complete shit show. Stefan milked this in among his, neo-Nazi community that he was constantly trying to get validation from for all it was worth. He considered this his crowning achievement. He never stopped carrying on about it. He thought he'd done a massive, amazing thing. However, and I can reveal this now, being as it's a couple of years on for the first time, they never actually fired the staff. They just told him that they'd done it just to shut them up. So he never actually even did the thing that he thought he'd done. He did get $651 out of him to go and spend back at the bar, but the staff never got fired after all. I mean, that would have moved on by now. It's years past, Anyway, I just thought Stefan would like to hear that in this video. Sorry, mate. It's actually really crucial context that Stefan's big crowning achievement when he was with NSN was extorting someone for money, because it directly relates to the circumstances that led to his excommunication from the world of Nazis. So let's get into that. What happened? NSN leader Thomas Sewell issued a statement on Telegram revealing that Stefan had received a significant amount of money from neo-Nazis around the world via direct solicitation. The money had been promised by him to the Nazis to go toward the mounting legal fees for NSN members, not just for Thomas Sewell himself, but to various other members too. But this money, they'd discovered, had never arrived in Sewell's hands. Now, this amount that Stefan is said to have stolen from Australian neo-Nazism as a cause totals a whopping $51,000 and counting. This figure is rising as more reports come in, according to Sewell. What a spectacular blow to Australian neo-Nazism that little comrade Heraclius has been dealing in secret all this time. Fantastic blow. Some of these Nazis have been heavily implying that he was paying for heavy brothel usage with this money. But I like to think that he fleeced Tom Sewell for bail money so that he could also pay for that little freedom or death pen. Or perhaps the Jack Russell puppy in the dog pram. You know, purebred Jack Russell puppy, they go for thousands. Where's the money for that come from? What about his tidy whities? They don't grow on trees, hey? I'll tell you what's probably more expensive than anything. Barbecue nationalism, mate. A weekly suvla. Do you know how much that'd set you back? I reckon Sewell paid for that. And now he's stopped posting. He's been excommunicated from Nazi circles. They're all threatening to visit him to sort him out for the missing $51,000. He's died a complete reputational death among the only people left in the fucking world, the scum at the very bottom of the barrel no less, who would ever accept him. And this was his eulogy. So goodbye, little man. Remember, like I've been telling you for 8 years now, you're not white, you're Greek. Oh, incidentally, by the way, Thomas Sewell's statement about Stefan, it concluded with, and I quote,
"Under my leadership, I will more effectively root out and destroy it."
Conduct like Stefan's. That's funny. Under his leadership, Stefan was allowed inside in the first place. But that's the moral of the weird, sad lesson that is Stefan, the brown Greek white Nazi, isn't it? It's that Nazis will even take him, ostensibly the living olive antithesis of their rhetoric and implied values, no less, if he works hard enough for it. Because Nazis are really desperate for friends. In fact, if you just stroke their egos a bit, it turns out they'll even consider doing the occasional diversity hire.